Now with a closing statement for the motion, Islam is dominated by radicals, is Asra Nomani.
Regained the ground, wrestled back our communities? I don't think so. A Christian or Jew cannot go into Mecca because you're banned. A woman cannot travel to Mecca because of the laws of the land that say that she has to have a chaperone. The men in our community have decided that, in fact, their radical version of the ideology allows them to retain power. You can call it an autocracy, you can call it dictatorships, you can call it anything you want, but it is radical and it is dominating our communities. Just look at the example of the South in the 1930s, let's say. Civil rights. Let's change the words of our proposition. The South was dominated by white supremacists at that time. Would they have been the majority? Maybe not. But they controlled the churches, they controlled the cops, they controlled the laws, they controlled the power structure. That's what we're talking about. Our laws, our power structure, our cops, our clerics are all on the payroll of an ideology that is radical. And it's an issue of great pain to me as a Muslim. It's an issue of great sadness. It breaks my heart that this is the reality and the truth. And it's an ugly truth. But I challenge you to accept it, because even though it's ugly, it's only when we're honest about it that we're actually going to be able to change the world, so that this reality where Muslims regain the ground and take back our communities will actually happen one day. It hasn't happened yet, and I can only hope that it will happen. But right now, we have not won the war, and the struggle continues. And I assure you that we are in the struggle.
Asra Nomani, thank you. And now, Richard Bulliet, your closing statement.
Yeah, I have some problem squaring what Asra has just said with what Paul Marshall started with. He started by saying that Islam is okay, most Muslims are okay. Like, nothing against Islam, nothing against most Muslims, but that the people who are dominating are those who are striving for a political order that represents a reactionary version of Islam. Now we get to Asra, who just says that, it's true there are these dictatorships, these totalitarian states, these autocracies, and autocracy is radical, and therefore radicals to dominate Islam. Well, but that radical, that isn't the radical that Paul's talking about. There is nothing in the government of Syria or the government of Egypt or the government of most of the other autocracies in the Muslim world that is in favor of striving for a political order that represents a reactionary version of Islam. In fact, most of these governments are dead opposed to this sort of version of Islam. They're trying to have what they call secular nationalist states. You can talk about the Ba'ath Party in Syria, you can talk about the Tunisians, you can talk about virtually every country except Saudi Arabia and Iran. But you can't get away with the idea of saying that radicals dominate Islam because all autocrats are radical. That may be true, but that's very different from saying that what's dominating Islam, which is the proposition of your team, is a particular version of Islam. We can agree that autocracy is the besetting problem of Islam, and that many of the reactions that you have come as reactions to autocracy. And just one word on the women. Every Muslim political group I know that is striving to find elections in the Muslim world believes that all women should have the vote equally to men.
Richard Bulliet, thank you very much for your closing statement. And now the last of the closing statements from a supporter of the motion, Islam is dominated by radicals, David Gartenstein-Ross.
In this debate, we've defined hegemony in two ways. We've defined it as being hegemony over institutions and hegemony over states. Now, Richard Bulliet in his last speech finds a contradiction in that he says that the autocratic governments aren't actually Islamic. Now, here's a statistic that Asra put forward previously in the Q&A, which is important. About 1 billion of the world's Muslims live in Muslim-majority countries. There are 22 countries in which Islam is declared the state religion. A look at the numbers shows that about 602 million Muslims, that's 58% of those living in predominantly Muslim countries, live in places where Islam is the state religion. So the autocracies are indeed enforcing Islam. That's one thing that they're doing. But it's not just the autocracies. It's the institutions. The institutions are important as well. And their argument, as Bulliet expressed in his last opening speech, is that for all the reasons given to you by the other side, vote against the motion. It comes down to a question of what hegemony means. And the only person on this side who tried to define hegemony is Richard Bulliet, who said hegemony requires a majority. Well, by that logic, everyone on that side has talked about how the U.S. is a hegemon. Does that mean that the majority of people in the world are then Americans? Of course not. The fact is here that if you look at where power is in the hands of those who are trying to enforce a particularistic view of Islam. Look at the institutions. Look at the anti-apostasy laws. Look at anti-blasphemy laws. Look at the prohibition on evangelism. Look at prohibitions on free speech. This is not a pretty situation. And it's important to recognize where the power lies. That's what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to vote for the resolution to identify the challenges that all of us, all debaters acknowledge, lay ahead. And that's why I would like you to vote for this resolution. Thank you.
And thank you, David Gartenstein-Ross, for your closing statement, and thanks to all of you.